Hello, everybody. This is Gio from the Gio and Joey show, just Gio solo. I just have a passion and I'm going to be doing more Bible stuff. Obviously, we go live on Monday nights at 6 p.m. Central, where we do political stuff. We might do some Bible stuff as well. But throughout this next couple of days, I just want to do some Bible stuff. And one big issue with me and with Christianity is this divide about whether we have to keep the Sabbath or whether we worship on Sunday. And there's this big divide. And so, obviously, for me, I think the Bible teaches, and that's what I'm going to try to prove, that we should still honor the seventh day Sabbath, which is in Scripture. For example, if you look at all the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and we're going to get to that eventually, there is no command to worship on Sunday. In fact, the Bible has given us two things that commemorate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. In Romans chapter 6, there's baptism. And when we get to Romans, we will go deeper dive in there. And then there's obviously the Lord's Supper. As often as you do this, right, you proclaim the Lord's death, burial, and by implication, resurrection. And so we honor the resurrection of Jesus Christ by baptism and the Lord's Supper. No command in Scripture. But let's start at the beginning. And this is where I want to go. Right before there was ever sin in the beginning, God finished his creation with these words found in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. It says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their host. By the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made." What's interesting about this fact is that there is a threefold blessing on this day that you don't find in any other days. And regardless of where you stand, we have to, if we're honest with the scriptures, if we're honest with the Bible, regardless of where you stand now, post-cross, we know in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he completed all his work, and he rested on the seventh day. And what's interesting about the seventh day, as I point out, is that he rested, he blessed it, and he sanctified it. So in other words, the threefold blessing is there. So it says, then God blessed the seventh day, not the first day, not the second day, not the third day, not the fourth day, not the fifth day, but the seventh day. He sanctified it. In other words, he set it apart as holy. God set it apart as holy, because in it he rested. Now, God did not need to rest. God doesn't neither slumber nor sleep. God is all powerful. God doesn't need the rest in the way we need it. However, he ceased from his creative work, and he made this day to spend it with his creation. And us, his creation, receive a blessing if we keep the seventh day Sabbath. No other day of the week was bestowed this triad formula. Now, people will say, nowhere here does it say the Sabbath. Nowhere here do you see the word Sabbath. Regardless, the Hebrew word for rested has at its root that which means the Sabbath. But let's just keep it in the English. Let's just keep it where we look at the rest of Scripture. And so in creation before sin, the seventh day, which is Saturday, or the Sabbath, was blessed by God. However, if you go to the next slide, Exodus 16, 25, 26 establishes a connection between the seventh day and the Sabbath. Listen to what Moses said. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field." He's talking about the manna, right? They were to collect the manna every day, not save any till tomorrow because it would spoil. But on the sixth day, the day of preparation, which is Friday, they were to collect twice as much, because they weren't supposed to collect any on the Sabbath. They should rest from their labors, and it did not spoil. Here's the reason why. He says, 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. And if we're honest with ourselves, and I am giving people the benefit of the doubt that they're honest with Scripture. Perhaps you haven't seen these verses. The Sabbath here is mentioned to keep it holy before the law in Exodus is given in chapter 20. This is chapter 16. And so you can't say that it's just part of the Jewish heritage. In fact, it is pointing back to creation. It's since creation that God made the cycle of 6 days you shall work, and the seventh day you shall rest. Remember the threefold blessing. He rested, he blessed it, and he sanctified it, right? And so you see that same formula when the 10 Commandments are given. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, right? And this is what not bothers me, but it intrigues me that it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now, when you consider that it's the one commandment people have forgotten, right? We keep the moral law, we keep the 10 Commandments, we keep the other 9, but the fourth one, which is the longest of all the commandments, the fourth one, which entails my relationship with God and with man, right? What are the 2 greatest commandments, Jesus says? Love God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, in the fourth commandment is embodied those 2 commandments, right? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughters, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you, or stranger. Why? What's the reason? For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. There's a 3 triad formula. He rested, he blessed it, and made it holy. In other words, he sanctified it, set it apart from the other days. Because in the other days, he created something. But in the seventh day, what he created was an oasis for man to rest in the completed work of God. And that's the beauty of the Sabbath day. That's the beauty. And we see the connection where it's in creation, the same triad formula, even though the word Sabbath is not used. When you go to Exodus chapter 16, 25, and 26, you see the connection of the seventh day and the Sabbath. And then when you go to the 10 Commandments, then you see the same triad formula there. And here is where people get it wrong, because people say, well, the Sabbath was for the Jews. I think people misunderstand what that means. Right? Because the people of God have never been about bloodline. The people of God have never been about your nationality. The reason Israel was chosen as a nation was because they entered into a covenant relationship with God. And we see it. Ruth wasn't Jew. And then there's Rahab, who was a prostitute, who she was grafted into the people of God. So it's not about bloodline, but it's about covenant faithfulness. It's about people who will remain faithful to the covenant of God. And in the next video that I make tomorrow, I'm going to show you that the Bible talks about that there should be one law for the stranger and for the Israelite. Not 2 separate laws. There isn't a law. There isn't a salvation that's different for the Jews than it was for us. As a matter of fact, the term, the just shall live by faith, is an Old Testament principle found in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2. And I'll leave you with this as a teaser for tomorrow. There are 4 things that the Bible in the Old Testament calls as a sign, or that was very important to the nation of Israel, not because of bloodline, but because of covenant connection to God. One was the rainbow, right? the promise that the Lord would never destroy the earth again. Then there was the Passover. Then we'll see tomorrow that there is a sign of the Sabbath, that it's the Lord who sanctifies the people. And then obviously there's circumcision. Now we're going to look at those 4 signs and how they carried over and what they mean to us today. So until next time, in recap, we saw that the 7th-day Sabbath is formed in creation before there was ever sin. We saw in Exodus 16, 25, and 26 the connection between the 7th day and the Sabbath day. And then we saw in the 10 commandments, the longest of all the commandments, the 4th commandment, that the triad formula of blessed, rest, and made holy or sanctified is there. And not only that, we mentioned that love for God and love for man is embodied in the 4th commandment. And it is sad that as Christians, many have forgotten to remember the one commandment that Jesus said not to forget, that God said not to forget. So pay attention to tomorrow. Until then, God bless.